Welcome everyone to the University of Minnesota China Center's Considering China webinar. Qianlong, Master of the Nets, Lunar New Year in the Qing Palace with Professor Daniel Greenberg. I'm Joan Brzezinski and I direct the China Center. I thank you for joining us today and thank you for your support of the China Center and this Considering China webinar series. Special thanks to Kai Mei and Joseph Terry for their generous support of this program. And I invite you to start the Year of the Dragon by helping us advance our mission. Please consider a gift to the China Center. You may do so through the link on the webinar announcement or on our website. Today's speaker, Dr. Daniel Greenberg, is an assistant professor at the Department of Art History at the University of Minnesota. His research examines art and empire in the early modern China. His first book, Project, Mapping Without Maps, explores how paintings, state ritual, architecture, and natural history were used to define the Qing Dynasty as a political, cultural, and environmental power. He holds a PhD from Yale University and completed master coursework in history of calligraphy at Graduate Institute of Art History at National Taiwan University. Welcome, Professor Greenberg. I'm so interested in this period of Chinese history and particularly in Emperor Qianlong. He's a fascinating guy. Please give us all of what you know. We're so excited to have you here. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much for that wonderful introduction. Thank you so much for inviting me here today. It's a pleasure to share a little bit of what I'm working on and what I have been working on for, gosh, how many years? 10, 15 more? What you're going to get today is a little bit of the introduction / first chapter of my book that's coming out, but sort of put into a way that I hope will be fun. And so without any further ado, I'm just going to share my screen and we're going to hop right in. Okay. Let's see. So the title of my presentation today is The Master of Nets, Lunar New Year in the Qing Palace. And let's get started. Imagine a net spread above the palace of the god Indra, reaching infinitely in all directions. Carefully tied to every knot within the weave of this net is a brilliant jewel with infinite facets. If we were to closely examine one jewel, we would see reflected within its facets the net itself and all the other jewels. At the same time, each of the jewels reflected in that jewel reflect all of the jewels in the net, creating an infinitely recursive process of self-reflection. Now imagine that the Qianlong Emperor, who you see here in the first year of his reign, in 1735, wished to make a similar net. He was the shuttle, he was the line, and everything he touched through his actions or through the art that he commissioned became a jewel that was stitched into his creation through these actions. As an emperor, not a god, the scope of his net was limited by his own ambition and industry. And the jewels themselves had finite faces, each showing only a part of the whole. Qianlong's net was an active self-definition that had important ramifications for himself and the Qing Empire. More than an act of self-portraiture, constructing and maintaining his overlapping public and personal identities allowed Qianlong to effectively rule a diverse, expanding imperium. The problem with examining a piece of an expansive, self-reflecting web is that all borders and narratives are external to the organic, non-linear logic of Qianlong's construction. The power of the imperial netmaker was not only to make connections, he was also the thread that held everything together. Only the emperor had the privileged perspective to see the complete weave. Qianlong's net is, by imperial design, impossible to fully represent. The book project, and the piece that you're going to see today from that book project, examines a series of art and architecture that was created between roughly 1750 and 1760 to envision and support Qing foreign relations. And we'll talk about that. This was a time of intense imperial self-examination that was tied to a critical decade of Qing consolidation and expansion. Art, ritual, and policy were all jewels in Qianlong's web, placed by the imperial hand and held in place through his power. And Qianlong, as in his role as this net maker, worked sedulously in his role, in his identity as the Han Emperor, as a Tibetan Chakravartin or wheel-turning king, and here you see Qianlong again, as well as a Mongol Khagan or chief of chiefs. Imperial art was not ancillary to the maintenance of the Qing Empire, I argue. It was just another facet of the policies that held it together. So having said all that, right out of my introduction, I'm going to slow down a bit, and we're going to take a step back and move from these images of Qianlong to discuss a bit about the Lunar New Year in the Qing Palace in Beijing today. So just to sort of orient ourselves, moving from this representation, this magnificent representation of Hongli, his given name in Manchu, sitting astride this magnificent horse, as painted by the Jesuit priest, the Jesuit lay brother Giuseppe Castiglione, or Lang Shining, resplendent in his imperial armor, and looking every bit the Manchu lord. We're going to take a step back from Qianlong the man and look a bit at the Qing Empire. We're going to think about it as an expanding imperium that changed dramatically over the course of Qianlong's time as emperor. You can see the areas that were originally part of, I guess my mouse doesn't work, so you're just going to have to let my words paint a picture. The part in the sort of lighter yellowish brown is the area of the Ming, which was expanded after the Qing conquest. The Qing were a Manchu people that arrived from the north, from Manchuria. They swept in, they took control over the territory of the Ming and established the Qing Empire. And over the course of the 17th and 18th century, through a series of campaigns, both military as well as diplomatic, the Qing expanded out into Xinjiang, the new territories that are here depicted in green. And in fact, this critical period of expansion in the 1750s is sort of the focus of my book. How did the Qing exert control over this area? How did they pull it into the empire? And additionally, at around the same time, the Qing also welcomed Tibet as part of its protectorate. So Tibet became a part of the Qing in a very interesting, complex way. And in fact, my colleague Wen Xingqiu has written about this. It was not necessarily a straightforward conquest. It was a reciprocal relationship in which both Tibet and the Qing received different things in exchange for military protection on the side of Tibet and a sort of cultural and religious legitimacy on behalf of the Qing. But in any case, we're talking today about Beijing. And it's located here, and we're looking specifically, finally, at this representation of a Lunar New Year festival within the Forbidden City in Beijing. This painting is called 萬國來朝圖, which I have translated as All Countries Bearing Tribute. This has been translated a number of ways. It's actually a pretty famous painting for Qing studies. Lots of people like to use it, but it's a very complex painting for reasons that I think will become evident through our discussion today. And you'll see that my discussion of nets and jewels has a lot to do with this painting, because the closer we look at the painting, the more you'll see that it relates to things that are here and there, and they all connect together to make this painting a powerful representation of what the state rituals that manage Qing Empire were supposed to look like. And moreover, how a painting could connect the emperor himself, the living emperor, to this ideal vision of Qing Empire. This in the class would be the place where I'd pause a beat and I'd let people ask questions, but we don't have time for that, so I'm going to keep going. Let's move from that representation of the Forbidden City to a satellite depiction of the Forbidden City And I want to take a minute to talk about the Yangxindian, the Hall of Mental Cultivation, which was a center for the Qianlong Emperor only during the Lunar New Year festival. So the emperor traveled a lot during his reign, and he spent the majority of his time actually outside of the Forbidden City. He was only here in the city for certain very specific periods. And during the Lunar New Year, he stayed in this hall. And in fact, within that painting that depicts the Lunar New Year within the palace, we can see the emperor, who is right here in the center of this image. You can see him wearing his regal imperial yellow robes underneath an outer robe to cover him up because of the cold, sitting on this folding chair, about to be attended to by a young prince who's coming in from the right. He's surrounded by family. There are princes wearing apricot robes, lighting a firecracker, again for the new year. There are other high-ranking officials bringing strange rocks. We know this to be the Lunar New Year for reasons that will become clear later. There's an inscription on another version of this painting that identifies it positively as such. But also, a fun fact, within the Manchu tradition, the Lunar New Year duilian, the lucky couplets that you put up for the Lunar New Year, are white, not red. So you can see a pair of them on the two pillars outside of the Yangxindian, flanking Qianlong here. Now, this studio space was a space where he both slept and he did some work. He looked at paintings. It was his own private area. And what's interesting is that this painting itself that depicts Qianlong in this area hung within the area itself, meaning this painting was designed to hang within the Hall of Mental Cultivation, the Yangxindian. So let's take a closer look at what's happening within the Yangxindian, within the Hall of Mental Cultivation. This is the Hall of Mental Cultivation as it exists today-ish, the outside of it. It's open, or it was open, and you can sort of see within it. This is an important hall because it includes within it the Hall of the Three Rarities, the Sanxitang, which was the repository for Qianlong's most valued works of art. In fact, the most precious pieces of painting and calligraphy within the imperial collection bear the seal of the Hall of the Three Rarities. But there were also places to sleep, to relax, and there were a number of important paintings, large paintings, that were created for this space. And just because I thought it would be fun to take a look at them, and we'll see that these paintings are engaged with similar ideas of constructing identity, similar ideas of defining the imperial self and what it means to be an emperor that rules over a multi-ethnic and diverse and geographically spread imperium. That's a lot, but we'll see that it's done in paintings that reach out beyond the painting itself to incorporate elements from far-flung places. This is the Western warming chamber. So this is the studio on the left. And within the Western warming chamber hung this rather interesting painting. It's famous. Some of you may know it. Some of you may have seen it. But it is a painting that depicts the Qianlong Emperor here in the center. And behind the emperor is a painting hanging over a landscape screen in the style of Nizan, but maybe a copy of Nizan. That's another question. It's more like an 18th century copy in a Nizan style. You can tell from that open pavilion in the front left. And also the way the rocks are constructed, this is not really a Nizan painting. Nizan being the famous 13th century master of the Yuan dynasty. So this painting within a painting has classical allusions, but hanging over that landscape screen is another portrait of the emperor that is looking at the represented emperor, who is looking at this servant pouring tea. But interestingly, we must, of course, understand that this painting was mounted on the wall of the studio where the emperor himself could see it. So, in fact, there are three emperors here. There's the real emperor, the real body of the emperor, the represented emperor, and then the representation within the representation of the emperor. The inscription on the upper right translates roughly to, is it one? Is it two? It is neither connected nor apart. It could be Confucian. It could be Moist. These are two schools of Chinese philosophy, but also these characters, 入科, 墨科, could also mean, it could be a Confucian gentleman. It could also just be ink. And then, as Confucius said, why let it cause you anxiety? Why even think about it? So here is an inscription on a painting that is a representation of two versions of the emperor that is meditating on the power of painting to produce real or illusory versions of the same imperial figure that was looking at it. Very interesting. But this was only one of a number of these large paintings that were mounted directly to the walls of the Yangxin Dian, of the Hall of Mental Cultivation. Here's another one that I've written rather extensively about. It's called Merrymaking in the Palace, or Gongzhong Xingle Tu. And we can see that Qianlong is here on the upper left-hand side. And there are a collection of ladies that are crossing a bridge here. In fact, these are real ladies. These are Qianlong's real concubines and consorts. The second one from the left I've shown in another article I can't go into now, just no time, is probably consort Rong, who was ethnically Uyghur. What's also interesting about this that nobody else has noticed is that I think that the ladies might have been swapped for other ladies at another point, because you'll see on the right-hand side going through this fan, there's a break in the silk. The ladies were taken out, I believe, and then a new group of portraits was put in. But in fact, I want to talk about the inscription on this. Do I have the whole inscription? No. But I'll just read it here. The inscription on the upper part of this, written by Qianlong, reads, "A winding path among tall trees and serried cliffs. Going forward, they turn back startled to face a call behind. The copy of Liu Songlian's Eastern Mountains." So Liu Songlian was a Song Dynasty painter, a famous one. And in fact, an element of this that I don't have time to go into was copied from that previous painting that was in the imperial collection, has been copied here to make Merrymaking in the Palace. "I rest a while in a pavilion by the clear twisting stream. Attendants shouldn't scold these ladies. Yanzhi," these are the wives of Xiongnu chieftains, Yanzhi, "cannot become imperial concubines. How much better is this than Mingfei crossing the border? Among the twisting alleys of the inner palace, I idle for a while, leaning on the balustrade. Why must I leave the palace? How could it be that our clothes resemble those of the Han Dynasty? This painted meaning is turned into my domain. The waterfalls in front of the balustrade winding downwards. By the cliff, docile deer can respond to my call. Yet it is not my business to express complacent feelings about forests and streams. Rather, I strive to preserve peace and be perpetually mindful of the difficulties that face me." Now, on the surface, this painting might seem to be a pretty pastoral representation of the emperor with a few of his concubines and consorts. But in fact, the real question of the Qing Dynasty's relationship to foreign peoples is taken up by this imperial poem. And the context we need here is Mingfei crossing the border. So this has to do with another painting that was in the collection of the Qianlong Emperor, which is known alternatively as Wang Zhaojun crossing the border or Mingfei Chu Sai Tu in Chinese. This refers to the story of a tribute bride who was married to a Xiongnu chieftain and who left China to become a wife of the Xiongnu chieftain. And here she is in this early representation, which might be 12th century, it might be later, in the iron wire style of Gongsuran, maybe. It might be an early copy. We see Wang Zhaojun about to cross the border, her attendant holding a pipa, which is associated with her, very sad to leave the empire. And in fact, in the version of the story that was circulating around the 18th century, she commits suicide upon leaving. But there are other versions of the story where she doesn't commit suicide. It's very sad that this Chinese bride was forced to marry a Xiongnu chieftain as tribute. In Qianlong's version, however, these brides willingly come to him, a foreigner in some ways. Remember, he was ethnically Manchu, he was not ethnically Han. And in a way, this terrible situation, this tragedy of a Han Chinese person, Han Chinese bride leaving the empire and committing suicide is resolved in the Qing. And how much better is it that he is able to, within his imperium, negotiate these problems and have better relationships between Han and the tribal peoples. Okay, so this is also happening in the same hall of mental cultivation that we were talking about before. And I give this as context to the actual work that we're going to do today in the next 20 minutes on this one work of the 萬國來朝圖, which hung in the Eastern warning chamber. So this is on the other side, on the right side of your screen. I think I said screen, but screen. And we're going to take a closer look at that, and we're going to see how this represents a vision of empire that was not aspirational. It was a model for the correct ordering of the universe. And its emplacement upon the wall here was an invitation for the emperor to essentially cross the boundary between his real lived life and this represented perfection to make this vision a reality. All right, let's see if I can do that. Right, so this is the wall within the Eastern warming chamber where all countries bearing tribute was mounted. And let's go back to it right here. So this is the representation of all countries bearing tribute during the Lunar New Year festival. And what's interesting about this from an art historical perspective is that this is the first real representation of ritual within the Forbidden City. And every time you say it's the first of something, and in the field of China studies, you can be prepared to be scooped by someone. And I know that there are earlier representations by Han Shizai, and there's also a Ming Dynasty representation of the Forbidden City. But this is pretty special because we see all the elements of the ritual depicted in clear detail. All the ranks of officials that are lined up along the, sorry, I wanted to do this. Well, it won't go back. It's funny. Okay, all the peoples that are arranged along the central axis of the Forbidden City. I'll also mention art historically that this painting draws upon a genre of painting called ruled line painting that was used to depict the appropriate relationships between buildings, people, and space in a variety of Chinese paintings dating back for hundreds of years before this was done. And for this, we can look at this famous painting by Wang Zhenpeng that looks at this regatta on Dragon Lake during the Song. And the important thing about ruled line painting for us to know today is that it was done with tools. So rulers, compasses, things that enabled the painter to create the perfect representation of the perspective that you see here. This isn't perspective in a Western sense, so you shouldn't think of it as a 1-point or 2-point perspective, but the way that objects are laid out in space is done in the manner that allows you to see how different parts of a building relate to the whole. So for example, if you look at the pillars in the front of this large palace on the left-hand side, you can see and understand how each pillar relates to the other, where they sit within space, and how they construct this large building. But more than this, a lot of scholars have argued that these paintings are designed to show you how not only architecture is designed to fit within space, but also how people are designed to fit within these constructed spaces. So the people within these dragon boats that you see on the lower right-hand part of the screen are also part of what makes this event a coherent one within the imagination. So the Dragon Boat Festival is not a complete Dragon Boat Festival without the dragon boats and without the people within the boats. And what's more, and this is the key difference between this kind of painting and a Western approach to painting, is that this represents the idea of a painting. This represents the idea of this festival more than it represents an historical idea of that festival. I'll say it again in a slightly different way. This Dragon Boat Festival could be any Dragon Boat Festival. It wasn't one from 1123. It wasn't from 1126. It's not an historical instant. It's the idea of it, the perfect festival. These people are not individual people. They're ideas of people that fit within this idealized landscape. And that's important for you to remember as we move forward to see what Qianlong's painting was attempting to do and construct. Returning to our painting here and thinking of it not as a representation of a specific date, a specific historical event, but as an idea of the perfect ritual, let's take a closer look at the components of it. This is the central meridian line that goes up through the meridian gate in the front up to the Taihe Dian, the center of the ceremony that's about to take place. That line follows it. And this area here, within this Taihe Dian courtyard, can actually, if you look closely, be understood in the same framework I just gave you for the Dragon Boat Festival. Each of the individuals that you see here is divided into serried ranks. So each one of these umbrellas, each one of the musicians, each one of the pike bearers in the upper tier, they're assigned these positions because of their role within the ceremony. In fact, if you look at a later illustrated ritual manual, you can see that these specific places are mapped out within this administrative manual with the same kind of clarity as you see on the right. Now, it's tempting, it's very tempting to take the image on the left as the perfect idea of ritual, and then take the one on the right as an illustration of that. But I challenge you to sort of bend your mind, unlearn how you think painting is supposed to function, and understand that the image on the right came first by about 50 years. There was no illustrated manual like this until 50 years or so after the painting on the right was created. So if you're thinking about what a perfect representation of this ritual looks like and how it was conceived, it was done first within this medium of ruled line painting at the Qianlong court here. This later version is from the Jiaqing era. All right, let's move on a little bit, and we're going to talk about the inscription on the upper right-hand corner of another version of this same painting. This painting was important to the emperor. He had it done at least 4 times, maybe 5. There are 2, I think, versions of this I haven't seen that are supposedly locked away in the Beijing Gubong, and I'd love to see them, but I can't get access. In any case, this is a long poem by the emperor, and it is concerned with the stakes of ritual as a means of establishing appropriate relations between the Qing and foreign nations. So let's read it quickly. Still have, what, 10 minutes? This is going to be great. Spring is here, and there's enduring peace in the whole country. Tributaries from every place come before us in tribute. Who could possibly not follow our laws and ways? We're close to everyone in the world. None will be allowed to arrive late, for all foreign nations have been put into order. That's an important sentence here. All foreign nations have been put into order. The jade and fabric given by Tushan has been remembered since antiquity. The Qing Dynasty made offerings to this jade and obtained great blessings. How can we commemorate ordering the borders of our empire today and not credit the tactics and achievements of our ancestors? And I'm going to skip a bit here to the bottom. Wondrous objects from the east and west are presented to the throne. Southern and northern tribes are also come to celebrate the Lunar New Year. The painting was not made to brag about our reputation and civilizing influence. Rather, it preserves peace, provides protection, and supports the people. So the idea of this painting not being a kind of publicity stunt, it actually serves the function of preserving peace and providing protection and supporting the people. How can a painting do that? How can a painting support an idea of empire and support the actual conduct of foreign relations? Well, let's think about that. First thing we need to say is that this painting is about the Lunar New Year, yes, and it's about the Lunar New Year celebration, right? The reason I chose this topic for us to talk about today is because, you know, Happy Lunar New Year, everyone. Happy Lunar New Year of the Dragon. But it's not just about celebrating the Lunar New Year. It's about what happens on the Lunar New Year. And that is that foreign countries come bearing tribute to the throne. And in giving gifts and receiving gifts, they are ordered within this Qing conception of the universe. Now, within this painting, there are, in fact, foreign ambassadors. And it gets interesting because I want you to think about this for a second. In that earlier painting that depicted people in the dragon boat regatta, you had representations of individuals, and they weren't portraits. They were unidentifiable as specific historical people. They were sort of faceless people. I mean, they had faces, but they weren't specific enough to be identifiable as individuals. Well, that's a problem if you're dealing with foreigners, isn't it? because the only foreigners that the Qing knew personally were those that came bearing tribute. But if you made a representation of one of those foreigners, then it would look as if this painting were embedded in history. So let's take a look at the solution to this problem by taking a closer look at these foreigners in the lower right-hand corner. These are foreign embassies, and each of them are identified with a flag, and they're located in the appropriate place for within the ritual order, which is outside the Meridian Gate. But if you look at them carefully, you can see that they're identifiable as people from different places, and yet they're not specific people. And the reason for this is because these individual people were culled from an earlier work of ethnography, Western style, Jesuit style, Western European style ethnography that was created at the Qianlong court. And other scholars have shown that there's this connection between this earlier work of ethnography and this work here. So the question of how do you make a person, a foreigner, isolated from history? Well, you draw upon Western ethnography to create that. So my book argues that this painting here is a step forward. Ethnography was a way of placing foreigners within the Qing order, but the logical endpoint for that is actually to place these foreign figures in their appropriate place within ritual, which is here at the Lunar New Year. And this fellow here, wearing the same clothes, even though he's put his hat back on. He's French. Okay. Now, the last part of these are the Japanese. Amazing. These pictures are amazing, right? This is and you can find, there's a site online where you can see all of the images from this, and they're all really great. And these are the British, the English. It's a bottle of snuff he's holding. And I don't have time, I'm running late, but this was modeled on an earlier representation of tribute, but with some modifications, which I'm not going to get into. Okay. Now, as I mentioned, these ethnographic representations were drawn from European costume books and maps that were circulating around East Asia at the time. And it's most likely that the Qing court copied the methodology of this mode of representation without copying specific individuals. So this is a representation of London from Civitatis Orbis Terrarum, which we have a copy of at UMN. You can go see it in the James Ford Bell Library. But you'll notice that these people, their costumes in the front central part of this, they don't accord with what we see in the Qing example. And it's the same case with these Blau maps. These Blau maps were especially popular in Japan, but again, it wasn't copied in the same way. But nevertheless, these figures, this approach to representing figures with just enough specificity that they read as representatives from foreign countries, but with just enough distance that they don't look like historical figures, was taken from a European model. Now, this is significant because it's taking a European idea, a European mode of artistic production, and using it to serve a distinctly Qing, a distinctly Chinese idea about how painting works. So again, this isn't a case of Qing China taking European ethnography just to be like European countries, just to be like European royalty and the way that they commissioned and created ethnographies and maps. This was a way of taking that mode of production and using it to create a perfect representation of what ritual looked like. A ritual that is not historical. It's the perfect idea of it. It's kind of brilliant, actually. And the last part about this that I'm going to talk about with the 2 minutes or so I have left is I'm going to return again to this representation of the emperor, which, unlike everything else in this painting, is very specific. Again, I can't get as close as I'd like because don't have access to the images, but this is a representation from 1761 of the Qianlong emperor, and here's a representation of 1779 with the emperor dandling, it's a great word, dandling, one of his sons on his knee. He looks happier there too, I don't know why. Who wouldn't be happy? But the important thing I want to talk about here is that he had multiple versions of this painting created where his image changed. He was a historical figure. He was a real figure within this painting. And the real figure of the emperor, which we remember was looking at this painting in the real space where he was preparing to celebrate the Lunar New Year, saw himself within the painting in the same way that he saw himself within that painting 1 or 2. He created a bridge between the real stuff, the real emperor, and this representation of an emperor that was within a perfect idea of the ritual that was used to create perfect relationships between the Qing and foreign countries. So the emperor himself was a bridge between reality and representation, between the lived reality that he was experiencing and the reality of the empire as a perfect vision of the Qing. I'm going to bring it back to young Qianlong here and bring it back to him as this creator of a net that extended between him as he defined himself and the empire he was trying to build, a net that extended between the real figure of the emperor and the paintings he had commissioned to help serve the empire, but also to create it. Remember from the inscription, the painting itself helps to maintain and establish this order. So making this net was not just an exercise in self-portraiture, it was an event that allowed for the actualization of a personal and political order. All right, that's it. That's my time. Thank you.
Thank you. That was wonderful. Thank you, Professor Greenberg. That's totally great. So we have time for questions and answers. If you would please use your Q&A button at the bottom to submit those questions and answers, we really appreciate it. And we already have one stacked up here. So Professor Greenberg, what is your definition of ritual?
Oh, this is a great and difficult question. Ritual in this context refers to li. Li Mao de Li. And this is a very broad term in Qing historical studies. There's a fellow named McCabe Kelleher that has written an entire book about this. Ritual in the Qing was the stuff that was not only the order of the ceremonies that people participated in, but it was the fact that your place within these ceremonial, the ceremonial order reflected your real place within the order of the universe. It's a distinctly non-Western concept. It's very difficult, at least for me, to grasp. And so when I use ritual in this context, it's highly charged, and that's a very good and difficult question. If you're interested, I recommend reading McCabe Kelleher's book.
Can we write that person's name down? Whose book?
McCabe Kelleher. I think I have a copy right on my desk because I'm using it. Maybe not. Maybe it's at home.
Hey, how do you spell her last name?
Let me make sure I get it right. And there are other books about ritual as well. There's another ritual organization that is involved in Qing foreign management called the Li Fan Yuan, and a professor Qianlong, Chianing, has written a very good book about that. It's here. Should I write it down? McCabe, Macabe, Keliher. McCabe Kelleher. And his book is entitled The Board of Rights and the Making of Qing China.
The last name was Kelher.
When the emperor came on the throne, was he already fully Sinicized? I would argue no. His depending on who you talk to, his first language was Manchu. He conducted as a number of scholars have argued, including Mark Elliott and Pamela Kyle Crossley. They've argued that the emperor was very keen on preserving Manchu identity. I'm not that invested in this question. He was a polyglot, and he did speak Manchu, and he was proud that when the Panchen Lama came to visit, he could also speak Tibetan. So it's the question of was he Sinicized or was he not? I don't know if that's the right framework for understanding this man. He was, in his mind, fully Chinese, fully Han Chinese. That first image I showed of him as a Han-style scholar, fully Han Chinese. But as the emperor, I believe, he also considered himself to be fully Manchu and fully Mongol and fully Tibetan. There was no, his version of identity, his version of what he was, is different from the way that modern people construct and think about identity. That's how I understand it. And the Qing as an empire, and remember the emperor was the empire. The two are inseparable. The empire was multilingual. If you look at stelae that were erected, they're in all 4 languages of empire: Manchu, Mongolian, Chinese, and Tibetan, and they're still there in the Forbidden City. So the question of Sinicization or not, I know this is an important question in some Chinese discourse around the emperor, as well as in popular culture, but I don't know if it's the right framework here. I hope that answers your question. How has the Lunar New Year celebration evolved over time? I mean, there are so many ways to celebrate the Lunar New Year, right? The way they celebrated it in the Qianlong court is different from how it's celebrated now. The Manchus had their own ways of celebrating the Lunar New Year, their own customs. Han Chinese people have their own ways of celebrating it, and Han Chinese people have multiple ways of celebrating the Lunar New Year depending on where you're from, right? Whether you're eating longevity noodles or making dumplings or eating tangyuan, it differs from family to family and place to place. So I'm not qualified to speak about that specifically, but I can speculate on, I can only talk about the way that I see this Lunar New Year ritual fitting into a Qing approach to conducting foreign policy. I hope that answers your question. Is it possible to speculate when and why the ladies on the bridge might have been swapped and what the original ladies might have looked like? I don't know. I've dug deep into the records. There are very detailed records within the Imperial Household Department that detail all of the imperial commissions, or a lot of them. They're not completely perfect, but they have a lot of information. And I have been unable to find references to like an edit or a change. Sometimes things were just edited or changed. And I don't know, so it's all speculation. But I mean, my best guess, which you didn't ask for, but I'm gonna give it to you anyway, has to do with the fact that you're looking at specific people. These are specific ladies, and the ones that you see are the ones that are in the, they're in the Empress, they're in a painting that's the Empress Dowager's 70th birthday celebrations. So they're pretty, the ones there are the ones that were in favor at that time, maybe. So maybe it was done earlier and they switched them because different ladies were in favor at different times. I don't know. That's my best guess. Which religion did he practice? Qianlong was a devout Buddhist. He was, yes, he was an esoteric Buddhist. He thought of himself as a living incarnation of Manjusri, Wenshu Pusa, and he, within that same building that I told you about, he actually had a private shrine that had stupas in it to allow for his personal worship. I haven't been able to see them. Those are not open to the public. There's one book that has some black and white images of them. That's work that is waiting to be done by somebody who wants to look at this particular jewel in the net. So yes, he was a proud and very active Tibetan esoteric Buddhist, so much so that he asked the Panchen Lama to come and visit him in Chengde for his birthday celebration. And then after, that's another story. But yes, he was very devout in that way. Foreigners are portrayed in the painting. The way the foreigners are depicted in the painting is a bit chaotic. I mean, what do you mean chaotic? I mean, they're a riotous assembly of people that are waiting to be let into the gate. They're not within the, they're waiting to go into the ritual. They're not in the ritual itself. I think that the representations follow closely the Huangqing Zhigong Tu, the imperial illustrations of tributaries. And I think that the order that we're looking for is not necessarily an order of people standing in rigid lines. Imagine the act of putting people into a painting as a kind of ordering. The fact that they're there at all represents the fact that they're being placed within a Qing worldview. So a little more about how the sausage is being made for my particular book is that I'm going to use GIS to effectively map all the peoples within the Huangqing Zhigong Tu and within the 万国来朝图, sorry, I should probably stick to English, into, on real geographic space and maps. And it's my hope that we see an ordered world, or at least we understand from these, that we understand from taking these individual peoples and putting them in their real geographical spaces, that this represented a calculated effort to depict the world of tribute as understood by the Qing. That's a great question. I just think the question of order and what it means to be ordered is one that's not necessarily a matter of visual order. It's a matter of, it's a more complicated question. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, you can, so I'm wondering about the translation of Xin as mental, as in the Hall of Mental Cultivation. Perhaps Xin could be translated differently to reflect a less Western notion than mental. I'm wondering if a different translation for Xin may help us understand the meaning significance of ritual 2. Well, ritual, the last part of this first is ritual is very complex. I mean, Xin can be so many things. It can be heart, it can be soul, it can be mind. The translation I went with is the one that's the accepted one that most people use, including the Gugong uses the same one. So but you're right. Maybe we could interrogate that a little bit. But yeah, I mean, it would be interesting to think more about that question. I don't know what a more appropriate English translation would be. And honestly, I don't know if it's even, sometimes the translation is important, but what's more important for me is to clearly express the ideas at the heart of this this process of creating art and creating order. And I'll have to think about that. I don't know. If a different translation will help me get my point across more clearly, then I'm all for it. Thank you for your question. Intellectual. Are there any historic artifacts being displayed in Harbin or possibly had been? Harbin? Why Harbin? I don't know. There are historical, how about this? Hall of Intellectual Cultivation. Maybe this is maybe. There are historical artifacts all over China. And the point that I started with, and the point where we're almost at the end here, is that because everything is related to everything in Qianlong's court, everything is related to everything. And every painting, every work of art will connect to other things. If you spend 20 years, like I have, looking at art at the Qianlong court, you'll find that there are more works that that continue to connect and expand outwards from what you've studied. Just 2 weeks ago, I discovered that there was a kind of peekaboo desk screen that was sold at Christie's that has within it a representation of that "Is it one or is it two" painting. So it's like a little screen, and there's a little hole, and you look into it like a kaleidoscope, and in it, it has the same painting in it. And then that same peekaboo desk screen has on the other side another representation of another painting that has not yet been identified. I tell you, you can go insane trying to track down all of the connections between all of the historical artifacts. I don't know. If there are more artifacts in Harbin, I'd love to see them. Maybe they can be my next project.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Greenberg. We're going to wrap this up right now. I appreciate your time today, and I thank everyone for their wonderful questions. This has been such a great dialogue. I encourage everybody to go out and read the books that he suggested, but I also want to remind people that the Ford Library at the Wilson Museum has a lovely map by Matteo Ricci that also gives a wonderful perspective of the world and how the Chinese looked at it at a certain period in time. So there are many wonderful treasures at the university to uncover. So, but thank you, Dr. Greenberg. It was really wonderful to see you, and thanks so much for the time today.
It's always my pleasure. And there's so much more to be discovered and written about if any of this interests you. And so I encourage those of you that are maybe inspired, go take a look.
Great. Thanks so much. Have a great day, everybody. Bye.
Everybody.